Awesome. Then, Vera, could you please introduce the science chat, and then I introduce Demi?
Sure. I'm excited. Hi, guys. Welcome to the fifth science chat already. Started with the idea of just bringing people together a bit that are interested in protecting rivers and bringing some topics that would be helpful probably to link science and river conservation. And today we have Demi talking about science communication, which I think is a super important part of this. Yeah, and we're building a range of topics now, so if anyone has another topic that they want to include. I think Demi prepared a bit of a lecture, and since we're getting to a lot of people, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at the end, but also to write them in the chat so we can just use them afterwards for a discussion. Over to Jens, I guess. Then.
Awesome. Yeah, I will start like asking you all if you can write down in the chat the country where you're from, just to have like the record of that. That would be amazing. And well, Demi Anter, she comes from California, as far as I know. Artist, spoken writer. She writes a lot. Actually, I don't know her personally, but you are doing a writing course together, one of the river nerds also. And well, cosmic networking happened. So without talking more, I think we can also start now your presentation. You can share with us your screen.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, and I think
again that everybody else does mute so that we don't have any disturbance.
Perfect. Okay. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to do this talk. Before I share the screen with this presentation, I also wanted to say a little bit more about my background. As Jens said, I'm mainly doing creative writing, spoken word, performance. So I do know a lot about public speaking and communication, but this is really my first time to give a talk like this to scientists or science students. So it's super exciting for me to like do something different with my skills. But that being said, it's also new, this presentation, so please don't judge too harshly. And if you have any ideas about maybe some topics that would help to make it better, anything that wasn't covered that you're really interested in, I'm sure it will come up in the discussion and in your questions, hopefully, but feel free to make notes and send them to me. I would be really grateful actually for your feedback. So that would be wonderful. So now, on with the show. Okay. So storytelling, it's a really important tool that people have used since the beginning to communicate with each other, to explain things that are unexplainable, that we didn't understand before science. And now it's a really amazing tool for basically any career to be able to talk about what you're interested in, to communicate with people, especially if they don't have the same expertise as you do, and to share with them why it's important that they maybe take interest in these things that you are working on. The first thing that I want to talk about is creating images. So when you talk about your work, or when you maybe share your work in a proposal, in a grant application and things like that, it's really important that you figure out how to stand out. Especially depending on the situation, people might be reading hundreds of these proposals, and how do you make sure that your research and the topic that you're interested in are memorable to them? How do you create this impact in that brief moment that you have maybe in front of their eyes? I think that images are one of the most important ways that we create something memorable to people. So a friend of mine who has a lot of experience with grant writing mentioned this, that in grants especially, it's really useful to express a concrete image in your writing. So you're trying to create a visual in this person's mind of what is going to be at the end of this project. If they can see this and imagine it and really picture it, then they're already creating kind of a bond to what that will be. And it really helps them to make a connection between this picture and you and your paper. And especially if this is all that they get from you, they don't actually get to meet you and have like a real link with you, then this kind of image is really vital in order to create something that stands out to them. So how do you create images? There are a lot of ways. Images are specific, and this is like, above anything else that I tell my students, specificity in writing is, I think, the most important thing. So it kind of goes against what we think about intuitively sometimes, but specific is way better than general when it comes to telling a story. Sometimes we think we have to be general and generalize in order to make sure that the most people can relate to what we're talking about, because you don't want to exclude people who maybe haven't had a certain experience. And especially when it comes to more scientific projects, you might be worried also about excluding people who don't maybe have all of the knowledge that you do in the way that you're talking about your work. And that's definitely really important. Depending on your audience, you want to make sure that they understand at least the basics, or that you can create some ways for them to understand and let them in. But mainly, the more specific you can be, the better, because creating specific details and talking in terms of detail actually really helps, again, to create those images that stick in people's minds, rather than saying something that's really, you know, something that anyone could say. You want to really think about, how does this relate to your project? How does this relate to you? How can you write something? You couldn't hand it off to someone else and they read it out and it sounds like them. You want it to really sound like it's coming from you. One example I have, to plug myself further, is from a spoken word piece, actually, that I wrote a couple of years ago. And I won't play it for you because it's too long, but there's a section in it about halfway through. It's quite a long piece. And the piece is basically about a breakup with my ex-boyfriend. And halfway through the piece, I come to this part that's talking about remembering moments with someone, like these treasured moments that you have in a relationship. And it goes something like, remember the night we saw the fox on David Bowie's birthday, and the street was silent and filled with snow. Remember kissing in London in front of the casino. Remember the cats and how small they used to be. These are 3 images that I just gave you. And the reason that I wanted to use this as an example is because in the midst of this piece, so about like 3 minutes, 4 minutes in, you would think that people start to kind of drift maybe if they're just listening to something. But at that moment, I really feel the audience quite intensely and their attention very, very deeply. I think it's because they can really picture what I'm talking about right then. They can picture me in those 3 scenarios. But what it also does to them is, even if they haven't experienced that exactly, they start to picture their own similar scenarios, basically. So that like super special kiss they had in some particular place, or adopting a dog with their partner, and things like this that are, you know, related but not exactly the same, obviously, because we all have our different stories and our different details. And something between connecting to me as a performer and a person, and being able to really put themselves in my shoes, and then also more deeply remembering those really emotional moments in their lives, it creates this bond with you, and it makes for a really moving and compelling story. So I think detail is really, really important, and I urge you to think about this in all of your writing and all of your communication. You can also use images or create images by exploring different senses. So what were the smells, the touch, the color, all of these different sensations? Those are ways that you can start to really dig in and think about what makes this moment more than just, you know, oh, a beautiful woman walked in and I felt so moved by her, you know, like, what was this person wearing? What sounds could you hear? What did the weather feel like? Like, what smells were in the air? Obviously, this doesn't apply to all of your projects. This is very much still in the world of poetry, but I think you can see what I mean, how you can start to pick apart a moment in order to grab those details out of it. Very importantly, I think, for scientists, metaphors are a super good tool, because especially when you're talking to someone who doesn't have the same, you know, field of knowledge, or if you're maybe trying to explain your projects to children, metaphors are really useful tools to create stories. And again, all it comes down to is creating an image that they can really picture, something they can visualize and relate to, that then relates obviously to your project and can help them to understand it more. An amazing tool you also have is, depending on what kind of presentation you're giving, or if you're putting a website together, or maybe, yeah, an application, some kind of proposal for a project, you can use actual images, which is so great. And this, you know, won't go so deeply into that because my background is more in actually auditory storytelling and writing, but I've found that it's a really useful thing. For example, last year I worked on a project. It was an art film project, but it relied really heavily on some research that was done by a French and Spanish science team that were trying to, this is very complicated, they were trying to revive an extinct species of goat. And it's a really interesting project. It happened some years ago. So I was reading and watching all these kinds of materials having to do with it. And I came across a TED talk by one of the lead scientists in this group. And he used pictures of these basically goats that were, you know, brought to term with a surrogate goat. In the end, the project never really worked. They weren't able to bring a real goat into the world that survived. But there was a really powerful, super striking image that I didn't include because it's quite graphic as well, but of this goat that was eventually born but died after just 12 minutes, basically, because it didn't have the right lung capacity to be alive. And that image was really striking. Also, the specific detail that it only being able to survive for 12 minutes really stuck in my brain. And I knew that this was something that I had to incorporate into that film project because it was super powerful and really intense and really visceral. Okay, images can also employ characters. Stories employ characters. And for this, I want to bring you, I think, what is the best example that I can think of any media about the power of storytelling to connect with people, something that they maybe would not feel they could relate to. The Titanic. So, the Titanic, it's a real event that happened. This tragic event of the Titanic hitting an iceberg, hundreds of people dying, and obviously it was immortalized with a very famous film. I think what's amazing about the Titanic is that it's something that happened, you know, 100 years ago. It, depending where you're from, also culturally, it's not, you know, it didn't happen to people from my country. Like, you don't have this connection to it. It's in history books. And why should you care about it? Of course, it's something that was really sad, you know. But we live in a world where we're bombarded by information every day, tragic stuff every day. You know, think about what's going on now at the moment and how overwhelming all of this information flow is. So there's no reason that you would necessarily sit down to take the time to, like, not only learn about this event, but also to really appreciate the kind of human toll of it and the emotional toll, which is why I think the movie is such a good example, because you really do, you care because you relate to two specific people in that story. You know, you take this huge story and you narrow down the focus to people that you can relate to. And it does, you know, an extra good job by packaging this big event into then a love story, which obviously is really compelling and very easy to get into. So you're really focused on this while this big kind of looming threat is happening, which makes it a very amazing, effective film. I'm just gonna check my notes. Yeah, so basically don't shy away from characters and telling their stories. Something I also thought about with this point in particular is, you know, with the situation that's going on now with the virus, you hear about so many people dying, so many deaths, so many horrible things happening. but I think it's really easy for this stuff to just kind of like wash over you and your eyes to glaze over until you hear a personal story. So until you see a tweet that says, my mom died of COVID today, and you start to learn about this person's life, then it really moves you, you know? So I think we need to find ways to basically narrow the focus. How do you personalize things? And that brings us to the next point, vulnerability. Vulnerability is a really important aspect of my work personally, but I think if you look at anyone who's an effective communicator, whatever their career is, whether they're an artist or doing something completely different, I think vulnerability is at the heart of many, many effective communication styles, basically. The personal is political. This is a phrase that came out of the 60s and 70s and actually out of feminism and these kinds of activist movements. But it's kind of taken on different meanings over time. And for me, I like to think about this phrase a lot when it comes to how do you talk about a really big topic, but make it relatable to people. And this, again, is kind of the Titanic thing. But for you as a person, how do you get people to care about a huge thing that's important to you, whether it's politically or scientifically? Obviously, there are huge intersections with that particular, those things, you know, politics and science. And I think the way to do that is to bring it to your own story. Which brings me to, oh, the tables have turned. The iceberg is in trouble now. I hope you appreciate that. I felt very clever putting this together today. So Greta Thunberg. I think Greta is a fascinating person and a fascinating example for a lot of reasons. If this were more of a public speaking and spoken word kind of, you know, course or workshop, I would definitely want to talk a lot about her just as a person, why her speaking style is very compelling, because I think there's a lot to analyze there. And if people are interested in that, we can always talk about it later. But what I wanted to focus on at the moment is Greta's vulnerability. I think the reason that she's made such an impact on people is because you understand why she cares about this issue and why she's so freaking passionate about it. She's scared about her future. And what is more powerful than to be let in to see someone's fear, you know? And when you see that, you also, I mean, obviously it sparked a lot of movements and action and sparked a lot of emotion for many people in the last year, to wonder about the same issues in their lives and to see themselves in her, you know? So her vulnerability in talking about this is actually absolutely her power. Barnea Brown is another really good example of this. She's a researcher, and in her talks, she's done lots of TED Talks. She has a really great Netflix special and many books, like a dozen books, I think. She uses a lot of personal stories as well as anecdotes from her research. So most of her research involves interviewing people. And it's really powerful. They really do such a good job of illustrating the points that she's trying to make in a way, again, that you can follow, that you can relate to, that you can laugh at. That's also really important. And I would definitely recommend to check out her work, especially her videos, for some examples of that. And there's tons of stuff on YouTube or Netflix if you're curious. So when it comes to exploring your vulnerability in your story, within the work that you're doing, there are a lot of questions that you can ask yourself to try to get more to the heart of this. Who are you in this story? Why does this project matter to you? Why are you doing this? And I know that depending what you're doing, if you're, let's say, finishing a PhD or master's, you're working for maybe someone else on their research, it might not be the most personally, you know, personally compelling project for you. But at the, you know, behind this, why did you get into this field? Why are you in school in the first place? I think you can still dig and try to reach for those answers. People are interested in people, you know, and I think that this is why it's so important to reach into these things. So how have you been personally affected? I think this is also important because, for example, with the topic of climate change, I think that now it would be very common if you're, let's say, working in that field in some way, to answer this question by saying, well, I'm also scared for the future of the planet. That is an effective thing, you know, but that's kind of a common response now. We're sort of expecting to hear that, and many people feel that way. So how can you go deeper than that? You know, have you personally been affected by something? Can you see changes in your community? Can you see changes in jobs available, in the economy, in the lives of people around you, in the health of people around you? How close to you can you really bring this, and how much more specific can you be? And how can your audience relate to you? I think as you go along further in your careers as well, you come up with a very interesting, different dilemma, which is you gather expertise and you gather this esteem around you and your work. Hopefully, you know, this is the goal, the idea. And people will then, you know, take you more seriously, listen maybe more to what you're saying. Maybe you'll have more platforms and chances to speak, and students of your own, and all that kind, you know, those kinds of things. But the catch with this, unfortunately, is that you also then kind of become further removed from the people that you're speaking with in a way. And they might see you as this figure that's kind of untouchable and not someone that they can relate to. And this is why I think, especially the kind of higher you climb in whatever world you're in, the more important it is to be vulnerable. Because when you're vulnerable about why you're passionate about this thing, it lets people in, it lets people see you as a person and not just as someone who's, you know, blabbing to them or teaching them. And it creates this connection with you that's unlike anything else, you know. There is something to being respected and to having like a lot of accolades and stuff like that, but I think it's really when you are able to tell your personal stories and let people into why you're so passionate about something, that they feel invested in you as well, and thus invested in the work that you're doing, which is absolutely the most important thing. You want to be able to share this with others, and especially if you're working really hard on something, share with others why they should care. So again, all of these kinds of things are important to think about. And also, I will save this presentation, and if anybody wants to have the slides afterwards and also the links to different things as well, just email me and I'll send it to you. I think especially these kinds of prompts can be useful. And this is another example. There's not time to show you the clip, but this is a piece by a spoken word artist based in England, Liv Tork, who's wonderful. And she wrote this gorgeous piece last year dealing with climate change and seeing it kind of through the eyes of, well, her daughter, but also as a mother to her daughter. And how do you explain this really difficult topic to a child, you know? And it's so powerful because she's making the political personal and bringing it down to like me. How does this affect me? And you care about this topic because you care about her and you can see her emotion and her passion, and that moves you to be emotional as well. So to wrap up, I wanted to give you also some ideas of how you can maybe journal to help, you know, create some creative flow around these topics. I think some good questions about why is this important to me, and really break it down into simple language. What do I want to say? Because sometimes I even have this experience sometimes if I'm just like writing an email to someone, that I start to get really into the weeds and I don't even know what I'm trying to say to them anymore. And I have to really step back and close it and just write in the most plain language, what is it I need from this person? What is it that I'm trying to convey to them? So keep it simple, you know, and write all of these things for yourself before you go to write out your presentation that's going to be really important and shared with lots of people. Think about the emotions and feelings around your work and around a topic, you know. I was thinking about the work that you all are doing specifically, and I looked around I can't say that I'm super knowledgeable about it, but I looked through the website, and I'm really excited that you have, communication is sort of a thing that you highlight there. So I'm sure that you've already thought about these things a lot. But I was just thinking, I don't know necessarily that I would have such a connection with the idea of rivers or the health of rivers and why this is important in the world. But if you can tell me why it's important to you and the specific experiences that you've had around rivers, whether it's something from childhood or something more recent and a story around it, I would care about this. Like, this is how you hook me, a normal person. So I want you to really think about that and try to evoke those kinds of images for yourself as you're writing. Images, visuals, details. Details are king. So this is my email address and my website. Feel free to write them down. Feel free to write to me. If you have questions about anything, I'm happy to help as much as I can within my, limited scientific knowledge, but hopefully good communication knowledge. And I'm happy to send the presentation to you as well. So just let me know. Thank you all for listening. And I'm really excited to hear your questions.
Cool. Thank you, Demi, for the awesome talk. What we will do, I have already said 3 questions prepared, and then we will open the discussion for everybody to ask their questions, be it on the chat or speaking. But well, related to the first part, I think it's very interesting you touched this topic, because normally when you write, that's the first thing you learn. No, you have to go from macro to micro, go from generalities to specificities, and generalities are very good to communicate to a big audience. But curiously, also when I'm doing science communication in writing articles, I've noticed, like you said, this little detail about, for example, that species, that ecological process, that gives exactly an idea of what actually are we talking about, and that then brings me to another concept, which is many people tell you always you have to read a lot of papers, be know a lot about the topic to write about this topic.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like maybe, and my experience is better to read people like Edgar Allan Poe, for example. I think he's a very beautiful science communicator.
Yeah.
What do you think about where can we get some references and inspiration in the literature to communicate science, read, be written or anywhere?
I'm so glad that you brought it up, actually, because it was something I thought about today, but I didn't really fit it into the presentation somehow. I just recently was rereading some of Mary Oliver's poems. Mary Oliver is a very famous classic, I was going to say classic contemporary, that doesn't make sense. She was fairly contemporary, but she passed away just recently as quite an older woman. But let's say in the last 50 years, her work has been really important, especially in American poetry, but I would say worldwide. She's considered one of the greats, and her work is really rooted in nature. So I think for what you're focusing on specifically with this collective, there's amazing inspiration if you can look at how nature poets talk about the world around them and why this is so moving. For me also, I've realized that I've never had a really strong connection with nature. I don't know if it's because where I grew up, I mean, there's definitely amazing, I grew up in a desert basically, but it's not a place where you're going to walk around with tons of trees or be kind of wrapped up in the wilderness. It's not like that at all. So for whatever reason, that didn't really come into my writing very much. And now I'm reading all of these amazing, Irish poets who are talking about the land and sort of how they grew up and farms and all this kind of stuff. And I find it really compelling because it's very different from what I know. And it's made me pay so much more attention to the world around me. Now I'm actually trying to learn what are the trees that are on my street, what are the names of them and stuff like this. So I think that poetry or these kinds of things can be super rich inspirations.
It's funny you say that, because I don't know if you are know Humboldt, like Henry von Humboldt, one of the greatest scientists
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
19th century. He
absolutely.
was actually a very good friend of Schiller and Goethe,
Mhm,
and he was a scientist, but he
mhm.
actually was also very interested into art. And that takes
Yeah.
me to my second question. Like you were talking about these anecdotes, like
Mhm.
how to engage people into your story. Be it, for example, the ocean, the river, certain fish, or whatever. Like I feel sometimes when I'm reading like these old naturalists, when people are writing about them and they introduce a topic using, for example, Darwin, Thoreau, or other naturalists, like I feel connected. Like
Yeah.
how could we use anecdotes, and what type of anecdotes do you think are the best ones to communicate science?
You know, it's hard for me to answer specifically since I don't know your research exactly, and I haven't also been there, so I didn't live these experiences, you know. But I guess if I could just, from my imagination, imagine maybe what's going on these trips, like maybe you first got interested in it because you actually lived by a river, grew up by a river. This was part of your natural world every day. Maybe it was something that was important to your family or you're growing up somehow, you know, that you associated with some very strong figure in your life somehow. Um, if not this, and it's something more recent, then I would love to hear what is it like these trips that we're supposed to be going on now, right? If I understood correctly, what is it that you would be doing on the trips and what is your experience? Like, why is being in this natural space powerful to you? What does it make you feel? And I think even getting very abstract and very poetic with that is fine. Obviously, it's not going to be suitable for every situation, depending where you're presenting, but I think if you're writing this kind of stuff out, even just for yourself, with the idea, you don't have to show it to anyone. That's also something that I tell my students a lot. Just write. Don't worry about having to show this to someone. You know, don't worry about sounding stupid. Don't worry about correct grammar, about anything. Just write it out how you're feeling in that moment. And I think when you have it down on paper, it's much easier to shape into something else also for other people. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. One last question, and then we open the discussion, and then that is related to what you say. Like sometimes less is more. For
Mhm.
example, when we try to communicate any phenomena, any like complex ecological relationship we see in nature, sometimes we are overwhelmed by all the details we want to say,
Hmm.
all the information we want to communicate. So how can we effectively communicate a very complex phenomena without writing a Bible? How to not lose those details, but at the same time show the great picture.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends quite a bit on who your audience is, because if your audience is someone who has some stake in this kind of project as well, and perhaps a lot of common knowledge about it already or some more detailed expertise about it, then I think it's fine to go into details and like work with them as much, you know, give them whatever they need that will help them, like even going super deep into something. But for example, I was watching a talk with Stephen Hawking's daughter. She wrote a book, like a picture book, about black holes to explain some astrophysical ideas to children. And she explained the reason that she got this idea is because Stephen Hawking, they were at her son's birthday party, and another kid asked him, what would happen if I fell into a black hole? And he, you know, laboriously typed out the response and said, your body would become like spaghetti. and the kids were like super delighted by this idea, and they were all like, so there are a lot of things at play. Obviously, this is like using a metaphor that they can understand that's at their level, and it's quite funny as well. But yeah, I think maybe finding metaphors for what you're trying to say will help. And I think also if you write out this kind of Bible of information that covers everything, then you have this, and then maybe you can take it and start to pare it down to shorter, you know, to take what is the most important, what is the phenomenon you're really trying to talk about, and take these bigger ideas and kind of condense them somehow. It's hard to say without like a very specific thing in mind, but I would say like for me, I tend to always write very long. I'm not like a condensed, concise person at all. So it's important for me to get out this long version and then to edit it down. So I don't think there's anything wrong with working that way as well.
Cool, thank you. We have one question from Pilar. She asked, which tools could you recommend to design images, like in case you want or need to make your own images?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm lucky because I have quite a background in design. I studied art as well, so I've been designing things for many years, like for book design. Like I have a lot of different skills in that area. So for example, the presentation I made today, I did it with Keynote, but I also made these little cutouts and stuff with Photoshop. And this background, I knew, okay, I want something kind of cool background, so I just Googled and searched for like an image. I think it's a bit harder if you're starting with like none of these skills, but there are quite a few like more intuitive, easy to use programs, some open source programs as well. I don't know all of the names off the top of my head, but I know there are some really cool presentation tools out there that make it a little bit easier to give presentations. And let me think about images as well. I'll make a note of it, and I'm happy to like compile some and I can put it into this presentation too, so that when I send it out, it's there.
Thank you. If somebody wants to ask something else, like feel free to talk, or if you want to write down in the chat, it's also welcome. So Sersha from Ireland,
Hey, Saoirse.
asking, do you have any suggestions for communicating science when your audience may be reluctant to learn, such as highly religious groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that I thought a lot about regarding Greta. I think that it comes back to connecting with people as a person. So, you know, people are willing to listen to you as a person. People are curious about people. People are much more curious about other people, I think, than about any other topic in general. So if you can figure out how to connect to them about why you're passionate about something, I think it does wonders when it comes to like letting someone into stuff. I actually, you know, speaking of Ireland, like it's not a scientific issue exactly, it's more a political issue, but I was listening to an interview recently with an activist, really interesting guy who was campaigning, you know, with the repeal of the 8th campaign. And talked to a lot of people, especially older people, that he really expected to be resistant talking about abortion. And he found that just taking time and talking with them, he was shocked how open-minded people actually could be. So I think being open to this and really willing to just kind of put yourself out there. Of course, it's scary, especially I think when it comes to topics like this with religion and politics and things people feel super intensely about, obviously. So we hold ourselves back because we're scared that, you know, we're going to be told off and it might be a very unpleasant confrontational situation. But I think if you can take a deep breath and be willing to speak just as a person and really like open heart to heart, it may help. So.
Mike says she has a question.
Hi.
Hey.
Yes. I had my video off because my Wi-Fi is very bad, so I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and it was very interesting. So I'm writing my master thesis now, and I want to make use of storytelling methods, which is like it's been done, but it's also quite new. So for my thesis, I want to share the stories of local people that in the Balkans to illustrate their relation to the river and to nature in general, and that I want to understand myself and then share this story or this image in a more general way. Yeah, do you have any advice on how to share someone else's story?
Yeah, that sounds like a really beautiful topic. First of all, I'm already like, oh, I want to know about these people and how they feel about the river. I'm really curious. So it sounds super cool to me. I think you will have like a very rich tapestry to weave and to draw from.
Yeah.
When it comes to telling other people's stories, I think, first of all, if you're a researcher, you're already in a good position because you're not using a story in order to like build yourself up or say that, you know, this is your own creation or something like that. And you're not even really politicizing it. You're putting yourself in a position, I interviewed these people, so you have some authority to speak, I think, on their behalf and to present the work. I would really recommend to check out Barnea Brown's books, like any of the books. I think probably you can even find PDFs of some of them, or her talks as well. But the books might be more helpful since you'll really see it in writing and see how she presents things. She's also very good at like organizing and kind of visually, so you can follow the topics well. And I think she just, you know, goes into anecdotes, and maybe even seeing the example of how she does it can help. Like, does she maybe change, I forget because it's been a while since I read it, but maybe she changes the formatting. So if she's telling a story from a specific person, maybe then it's in italics to kind of visually distinguish it from something else. Obviously using quotes, direct quotes or translations of quotes can be really powerful as well. And yeah, I mean, I think it will be a really big project, but sounds really cool. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Ellie wants to add something to that question.
Yes.
Ellie from Austria.
Hey guys, thank you also for the chat and for the talk. Very new topic for me. I never thought about all these things, but seems very logical, especially when you see yourself confronted trying to tell people why the specific hydropower project doesn't really, you don't like it for so many reasons, whatever. Anyways, I feel like scientists, they are very often very caught up in whatever they are doing. And of course, I mean, it's stressful. They don't really have the time to think about how can I tell this amazing story that I know is there, but I don't want to, you know, I don't have the methodology and so on to bring it out there. Do you think it's useful to work together with somebody like you who has that experience? And is it very common to use that method? And how to connect to the people who actually have the knowledge of storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a nice thing to bring up. Also, how should I say? Yeah, Christy, hello. I'm also, my mom is also in the chat. She's from Salzburg. So we have
cool.
some Austrian, yeah, Österreichische group. But yes, I think that's definitely possible. So there are a lot of books, I believe, that have kind of been written out of these kinds of partnerships, especially on sociological topics. So Aziz Ansari wrote a really famous book called Modern Romance, and he was working together with a sociologist basically to talk about these things and to do research. So they did actual research, and I think this guy helped him to conduct it in a way that made sense. And then to communicate it, you know, it was kind of a combination of the researcher, the scientist, and him putting obviously like a more comedic spin onto it. So you read it really fast, it's really funny, it's really compelling. I think that there have been probably many partnerships like this, especially with books. But yeah, I'm sure that there are people out there. I know that there are people who also specialize in visual storytelling and in doing workshops for not just scientists, but people in many different fields. How do you create cool, you know, campaigns? How do you create cool presentations that really keep people's attention and stuff like that? How to connect with them? I think, yeah, it's, you know, starting with something like this is good because now you know me, at least, if I can be of use to you. But probably just Googling and looking for terms like that, maybe like visual storytelling workshops, especially right now, since a lot of people are doing things online, maybe even for free or for like a very reasonable amount of money. You can see if there are workshops being held maybe, and then try to just reach out to those people specifically. And depending where you are, then hopefully maybe there's someone there who can help you, or also in Germany, perhaps, you know, if you want to be presenting the work in German. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who do stuff like this, so it's definitely worth checking out.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, definitely something to keep in mind in all the work that the scientists are doing, that there are people out there that can help you make this great story around it, right?
Absolutely. And I have to say, like, writers, especially poets, because poetry is not really something that is not so easy to only do poetry, I have to say. This is why I have many different jobs. But I think that we're really excited to work on stuff, like especially this project I did with the goat. It was for an artist who was making a film, but you know, it was a little bit different for me as well, and I was really excited to just like do something new. So don't be afraid to ask people, even if maybe they don't have that much experience in that particular field. Yeah, just see if they're interested.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jess from Canada wants to also ask something.
Hi, very good presentation. Thank you very much. Kind of just going off of what Ellie was saying. I'm actually not sure if you can answer this question, but I figured I would just pose it.
Sure. Go for it.
See if we could pick your brain.
Yeah.
I think like communication of science is really important, because I just personally think, what is the point of doing your science if you can't get people to care about it? And getting people to care about it starts with effectively communicating your story and the science. But I think it's really important, but I always have this internal dilemma where I find that as scientists, we're all overwhelmed with all of the work that we have to do. Mm-hmm. And really taking, for example, a paper that you publish and translating it into something that is a really good story and that could be communicated to the wider audience isn't required somehow of us. And if we want to do it, it's like additional work. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, and if you think there's a solution to this problem. Maybe it's that you have to, if you publish, you also have to write some sort of article. I don't know. Have you thought about this problem?
No, I mean, you know, this world is very different for me. Like, I'm not really in the academic world anymore, and I haven't worked at all with like scientists and this kind of stuff. So I haven't personally had to deal with this. I think the most that I know about it is by listening to, let's say, like TED Talks sometimes by people who are more involved in these subjects and who are presenting information from studies. Obviously, a TED Talk is a really good example of how someone is taking actual data and then translating it into something that many people can understand and get interested in. And TED Talks also happen on so many different scales. Like, there's not just the official huge ones with thousands of people watching, but there are also very small ones that happen at schools, and you can even find videos of those online, so you can see a lot of different examples of people presenting projects that might not get international attention but do have some kind of interest for them. So I think, okay, so I don't know exactly from my personal experience how you deal with this, but it sounds like this also kind of gets into the topic of marketing a little bit, which I don't really know so much how it works for you, like when you're presenting research and publishing a paper, and then you want maybe to get attention for it. I don't know how important it is for you, or how much you're thinking, like, do I send this to press, or do I find other media to get interested in it? But I would say from an artist point of view, we often make things that are for like a really small audience, you know, like maybe only people in your community get to see an exhibition. And it's quite a lot of work as well to put into something that then only lives on in the memories of those people and for yourself. So it is important to try to figure out, how do you reach wider audiences, especially if you want to be involved in bigger projects, whatever that means for you, getting to bring your work further to more eyes, or getting to do, you know, getting more money for research and doing bigger things, whatever you're dreaming of. So there's been a big shift in filmmaking, but in a lot of, fields, to like a DIY approach to marketing yourself. And I think maybe that's not a bad idea to think about as well, because if that's not something that's built into your curriculum, let's say, or into the projects that you're doing, then if you care about this a lot, which I can totally imagine, you're investing a lot of time and effort into it, and if it's something that's you're passionate about as well, then I think it's totally reasonable to take the extra step of trying to get it seen by people. So I think you have absolutely the permission to do that. If that's part of the question, you should definitely. And I know it's also a barrier of, do I have time? But you have to decide what you want to spend time on, and then the question of how do you do it? I think there are a lot of ways. You could try to write maybe an article on a platform, like an open platform like Medium, that talks about your research. Medium has lots of different work on it, also scientifically based work. There were like very popular articles going around about flattening the curve and corona at the moment. So definitely there's a place for this and an audience for this as well. So I think this is a cool place to bring something to try to explain it in more layman's terms to people, and to bring your storytelling knowledge and all of this into it. You can also explore things like Kickstarter if you want to maybe crowdfund and make a campaign to maybe create a multimedia piece around your research, like a documentary or a web series or something like that. I think those are all really cool things to explore, because people are kind of fickle and have short attention spans. Reading is very hard for us sometimes. And I say it also as a reader, but we're really attracted to like video and audio. You can make a podcast. I mean, I feel like that is one of the more easy things to do that's also really compelling to enjoy. Like, I think I would rather listen to something even to watch something, to be honest. So those are things that you can probably do without very much extra like investment of equipment or money, to try to get more attention. And then once you have like a thing like that, it might also be easier to share this, like a podcast, with a blog or interesting media outlets that might also, be able to bring your work further, or relevant Facebook groups. It gets into all of these things about like, how do you connect with others? And I think there are a lot of ways to do that, through Facebook groups, through social media, networking, and all this kind of stuff. So
About
those
that,
are all really good ideas. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you. It's a super interesting thing to think about.
one of our audience, Nicole, she tries to answer to Jessica, and Jessica, you can check out the chat. Now David wants to ask something, and then Linda, and I think we are quite on time, right? So go for it, David.
Hey everyone. Hey Demi, thanks for the nice talk, chat.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, sometimes I'm really jealous about people that are researching about, cute animals, doing research with people, because it's way easier to tell stories that are compelling instead of when you're working, say, rocks or really physical stuff.
Of course.
I don't know. Do you have any suggestions on how to make this kind of topics more relatable, or some ideas?
Well, I totally thought about this today, and I didn't really think of a good way to talk about it without a proper example. But you're totally right. Like, if you're talking about animals, already emotional, our hearts are breaking. We really want to know more. And also with people, of course, it's like the easiest thing to tell a story about and to create a character around. But if you have something that's inanimate, then I think you are also part of the character, or you might be, you, or maybe like in Micah's situation, the people surrounding this, if that can be relevant in some way. Do you want to maybe tell me a bit what you're working on at the moment, or like a specific project that you have in mind?
No, so I mostly do research on physical habitats, but it's fish habitats. So when I tell my research, I usually talk about fish, because it's something that's easier for people to visualize and relate to. So in a way, I try to figure out a way to actually take animals in the context. make it easier. But it was more a generic question because,
Yeah,
for example, also this whole river story, it's mostly told to, I don't know, for example, kayakers that tell their stories and try to make the rivers exciting for people. But I don't know, sometimes it's just difficult if you work a lot with data and numbers to I don't know, I feel like it might be difficult to tell this kind of stories.
I think it would be interesting if one of our audience participants could like tell us a bit about his experience, because Nyaud here with us, he's a geologist actually, and he tries to make rocks fun and also ice. So,
Well,
Nyaud.
thanks, Jens. Actually, I'm a geographer, but it's pretty usual to have that declaration of a geologist, but doesn't matter. Anyway, I study glaciers, and I think glaciers are pretty easy to sell because nowadays with all this climate change stuff, as they are receding, we are seeing how many impacts they can have in our Earth and our society, basically. And actually, I also agree with Jessica because as a scientist, we have to work in our research, we have to publish, we have our salaries to do that. But then we also have to communicate our science, and that's the big part of it. And actually, it's maybe the most important part, because if you do it properly, then you have more chances to have new projects and new grants and stuff like that. So basically, it's a part that is not paid, and that's a big issue still in science, that when you are working in science communication or outreach or whatever, it's not going to be paid. But in my opinion, I would say that it really makes sense to spend some time trying to having a compelling story to sell, let's say, and then that output is gonna become new inputs for your career. So.
Yeah, you also reminded me of something, which is I actually used to work as an assistant for a screenwriter, TV writer. He created a lot of big shows, but one of the shows that he made was, I think, on PBS, and it was aimed towards teaching kids about the climate and about the rainforest specifically. It was like puppets and like really based in the rainforest, you know. So obviously these are things that are easier to sell to kids, but he wasn't a scientist and he wasn't super knowledgeable about these topics in particular. He got to know about them because he had the idea for the show, and then he started to research and get kind of deeper into that world and understanding maybe where funding comes from for some projects and stuff like that. And also, you know, how to apply to grants and how to sell what he was doing. But his work, he's coming from being an artist, being a writer. So maybe also, it also relates to Jessica's question that there might be people out there who are really looking for projects and who have this kind of expertise, and maybe I know it's not so easy necessarily to find the right person, but try to put out as many connections and ways of meeting as you can to see if you can reach someone who might actually be interested in, like, maybe they're already looking for this kind of content and they need someone with your skills who actually understands all of this and can explain it and really knows the research and everything to back it up in order to tell a story that they're trying to tell, you know, like documentary filmmakers and people like this. But who knows, like, I think so many people are doing interesting media projects at the moment, but it's definitely worth it to look into and see. And back to like what David was saying as well, and this thing about how do you make rocks interesting? How do you put a story around this? Like, I mean, one, I would be like interrogating you a bit, like these questions at the end of the presentation. Why did you get into this? David, why did you get into fish? If you can explain this, explain your journey a little bit. Maybe the whole journey is not relevant to the listener, but I think if you can start to like write about this, even just journaling for yourself, you might find some seeds of inspiration of, you know, to reconnect yourself with what are you doing, which is also a really important thing when you're in the midst of a big project and maybe it's been a while since you've kind of checked in. How did I get here, you know? So I think all of that can really help you to convey your passion about the subject, and passion tends to be what we're really attracted to and what makes us interested. So
go for it, Linda.
Okay. Hi, thanks a lot for that talk. It was pretty interesting. This might actually be a question also to everyone else, because I'm not sure that you have any experience with this. Because an issue like that I've come across a lot is when I try to explain my work, which is quite abstract, to people like my grandmother, who just she doesn't even know what DNA is, and then you have to explain kind of all of these like systematic processes that happen, that you just need so much background information, that it just takes so much time to explain that people just get bored or don't even, just stop listening. So I'm not, I was just wondering if anybody had any like tips about that.
Just to start, I would say, again, like thinking about metaphors, how can you make comparisons to things that they do know in their own world, especially like visual comparisons. And the thing about this too that's important is you might not get it right the first time. Like you might try to explain it in a way and your grandma still doesn't get it, and that's okay. Like use her as a testing ground. Keep trying some different things, because like even for me, I've spent years and years and years writing. I still don't get it right the first time that I put a thought down on paper. It takes a lot of time and a lot of editing, and also practicing reading it to people, realizing something doesn't come across, they don't get it, and then going back. So give yourself the time and be willing and patient with yourself as well to come up with different ways to describe these things, and really put in effort to practice it too, because I think it's not going to happen right away. And we also get better at communicating, at speaking, at coming up with metaphors the more that we do it. Like I think I was not really that good at it before I was teaching, but now that I'm teaching a lot, I'm like, okay, I know I can go to this story, I can explain this thing, because I've just done it so many times. So practice helps a lot.
Yeah.
I think I would like to know if somebody has an additional question, or else we are
Remark actually on this, Linda. Because like my brother comes back home quite often, and then he tells about his whole company, and I just see my mom not understanding either. But I actually don't think it's that she cares about what he's actually doing, but he cares more about what he's thinking about it. And I think that's the whole emotion that Demi was talking about. So if you can indeed more talk about the relation that you have with whatever you're doing, probably that's what your grandma's after, and not at all about like the details in the DNA. Like she's probably not going to understand. And I guess that's a way to indeed connect more people to your research. And cool. And
that's such a good point, Vera. I thought about this as well. Like, well, first of all, I've talked with some other single friends about this recently. When you're on a date, like it's really normal to ask someone, what do you do? But what do you do is kind of not really that interesting of a question, and if you answer often, it doesn't really necessarily like say that much about how you feel. So it's much more interesting to explore, how does someone feel about something, and to answer in a way that's like, well, maybe I have a job that is hard to explain, or maybe doesn't seem super exciting to someone else, but I feel good about my work because I'm helping people, because I'm doing this, like to bring it more back to emotions. And also, probably most of us have been in a situation where you are dating someone, you have a partner who is really into something, whether it's a hobby or a career thing that you had no interest or no knowledge about before, and you're listening to them talk about it, and you might also kind of glaze over a bit. And how many times you end up getting interested in that thing, not because they tell you, oh, it's really important, you should really care about it, but because they're so passionate about it and you're invested in them, so you're willing to learn more, So I think it's just like Vera said, it all comes back to like you and your personal connection with people.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Demi, for the talk, and all of you for being here and ask nice questions. And then let's see, just for you to know, we do this all Mondays at 6 p.m. Berlin time. So next Monday, who's gonna talk next Monday, Vera?
That's pretty like total different topic again, but we're gonna have a local fight actually. Maybe some of you heard that they're at the moment constructing a dam in the Utstal, and the fight it started since they started during the curfew, so it was a bit shady actually. And we're gonna have Marike from Free Rivers Fund and Dan from Save Our Rivers gonna talk about that. So the local fight and what they do about it and how they try to involve at least the whole kayak community to sign petitions and to send emails. But like, I think it has a lot of connection to this whole topic, so that's cool. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Well, and we still have a big challenge on science communication and interdisciplinary work. And if you are interested on seeing something really cool on this, check out one of the Björk, the singer albums, which is called Biophilia. She did a really interesting intersection between music, art, science. So it's always good to look for references, not only in arts, but also as scientists, we should check out writers, musicians, other projects, other ideas, and not only focus on our own stuff. So that's the challenge, to know each other also, and like Demi was telling us, like to feel this relatedness not only with ourselves but with other projects, and then understand how can we improve the communication of our own projects. So thank you all, and see you next Monday.
Yeah, thank you all. And my email is in the chat, so feel free to write if you want a copy, and or talk to the people in charge. We can also get it to you that way.
Yeah, thank you, Demi. It was a really interesting talk.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.